Washington is currently engulfed in a wave of political uncertainty as President Donald Trump makes two of the most controversial decisions of his tenure. On one hand, he has directed the U.S. Department of Defense to resume nuclear weapons testing, a move that breaks with decades of restraint, and on the other, the federal government is teetering on the brink of a prolonged shutdown. These twin developments have not only rattled the American political landscape but also sent shockwaves across the international community. According to White House insiders, Trump's Thursday night announcement came without prior consultation with key members of Congress or the Pentagon. The United States can no longer sit idly by while other nations expand their nuclear capabilities, he declared. He specifically cited China and Russia, claiming they were secretly modernizing their arsenals, and vowed that the U.S. would test on equal footing. While Trump didn't specify whether the tests would be explosive or purely technical, the mere mention of resuming nuclear testing has drawn global concern. Experts warn that if the U.S. breaks the 1992 moratorium on nuclear tests, it would shatter decades of arms control progress and undermine the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty (CTBT), a cornerstone of global non-proliferation efforts. Diplomats at the United Nations described Trump's remarks as a dangerous regression that could spark a new arms race. Both Russia and China have refrained from official reactions so far, but Chinese state media has labeled the U.S. move as an act of reckless power politics. At the same time, Washington is struggling with a deepening fiscal crisis. Disagreements between the Senate and the House of Representatives over government spending have paralyzed operations. Federal agencies are days away from running out of funds, leaving millions of employees uncertain about their paychecks. Critical public programs, from food assistance and health coverage to air traffic control, were under strain. Trump has urged the Senate to abolish the filibuster rule so his proposed budget could pass with a simple majority, but Democrats have strongly resisted the idea. Economists are sounding the alarm, warning that a prolonged government shutdown could cost the U.S. economy up to $24 billion. The stock market has already shown signs of volatility, with investors growing anxious about political instability. The U.S. dollar has slipped slightly in global trade, and consumer confidence has dropped to its lowest point in over a year. If this standoff continues, global investors may begin to question the stability of the American economy, a Bank of America analyst noted. The consequences could surface in the form of higher inflation, disrupted supply chains, and rising unemployment. Political analysts believe Trump is pursuing a dual strategy, using foreign policy assertiveness to project strength abroad while leveraging internal chaos to pressure Congress. However, this gamble could backfire. It's not the first time a U.S. president has used displays of power to distract from domestic troubles, said a former State Department diplomat. But this moment is different, the world is already on edge. A single act of nuclear testing could alter the global balance in ways no one can fully predict. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged restraint, warning that the world cannot afford another nuclear arms race. Meanwhile, within the U.S., public opinion is split. A recent Gallup poll found that 47% of Americans see the move as necessary for national security, while 49% view it as reckless and dangerous. As the standoff deepens, both domestically and globally, the United States finds itself at a crossroads. Will it reclaim stability through diplomacy and consensus, or will it plunge deeper into a cycle of confrontation, both at home and abroad? As the announcement of renewed nuclear testing dominates global headlines, the political temperature inside Washington continues to rise. The Senate has once again failed to pass a funding bill, pushing the federal government closer to a full-scale shutdown. Across several states, government offices are already operating at reduced capacity, and some federal agencies have begun sending employees home on unpaid leave. What began as a budget dispute has now evolved into a test of political survival, not just for President Trump, but for the entire U.S. government. Economic analysts warn that every day of the shutdown could cost billions. If the stalemate continues, the U.S. economy could lose momentum at a time when inflation remains high and consumer spending is weakening. The stock market is fluctuating sharply, and the dollar is under pressure as investors seek safer assets abroad. The Federal Reserve has expressed concern that prolonged political instability could damage public confidence and complicate its monetary policy decisions. Meanwhile, public frustration is mounting. Low-income families who rely on federal programs like SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and Medicaid face potential service disruptions. Several hospitals that depend on federal reimbursements are warning of delays in payments. Air travel has also been affected, with reports of long lines and limited security staff at airports, as the Transportation Security Administration struggles to operate with reduced personnel. Trump, however, has deflected blame, arguing that Congress, and particularly Senate Democrats, were responsible for blocking the government's ability to function. He has called for the abolition of the filibuster, a long-standing Senate rule that requires a 60-vote supermajority to pass most legislation. If the Senate keeps standing in the way of progress, the American people will know exactly who is stopping this country from moving forward, Trump said in a statement. Democrats counter that Trump's leadership style is fueling chaos rather than stability. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer accused the president of using the threat of national insecurity to manipulate public opinion. He added, "The nuclear testing announcement is not a defense policy, it's a distraction. The president is trying to shift the conversation away from his failures to govern." The U.S. media has coined the current moment a double crisis, one internal and one external. Domestically, the government's paralysis threatens to grind essential services to a halt. Internationally, the specter of new nuclear tests has rattled allies and adversaries alike. Editorials in major newspapers such as The Washington Post and The New York Times describe Trump's dual strategy as dangerous brinkmanship, arguing that it risks undermining America's credibility on both fronts. Defense experts remain divided. Some argue that limited subcritical nuclear testing could provide valuable data for maintaining America's aging arsenal without full-scale detonations. Others insist that any testing, even non-explosive, would erode trust in U.S. commitments and embolden rivals to follow suit. Once the taboo is broken, it won't stop with small tests, said Dr. Elaine Morrison, a nuclear policy researcher at the Brookings Institution. It will mark the beginning of a new arms race. Meanwhile, protests have begun to emerge in several U.S. cities. In Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, demonstrators carrying placards reading, "No new tests," gathered outside federal buildings, demanding that the administration reverse its decision. Environmental groups have also joined the outcry, citing potential risks of radiation exposure and long-term ecological damage if testing resumes in Nevada or other historical sites. On the international stage, America's allies are growing uneasy. France, Germany, and Japan have privately expressed concern to the State Department, warning that renewed nuclear testing could destabilize NATO's strategic cohesion. The United Nations Security Council is reportedly considering an emergency session to discuss the issue, with several member states urging diplomatic engagement before the situation escalates. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued one of the sharpest responses so far, stating that the world needs stability and trust, not a new wave of nuclear threats. The statement added, if the United States proceeds with such actions, China will take appropriate steps to safeguard its security interests. Back home, the pressure is building on Trump from within his own party as well. Some Republican senators, worried about the economic fallout, are urging the president to compromise on the budget dispute and restore government operations before the political damage becomes irreversible. Yet Trump remains defiant, insisting that both the nuclear testing decision and the budget standoff are part of a broader strategy to restore American strength and independence. As the crisis deepens, Washington seems locked in a tense standstill, a political and ideological deadlock where neither side is willing to yield. The outcome, analysts warn, could define not only the future of Trump's presidency but also America's standing in the world. Whether the administration can balance its aggressive foreign policy with a collapsing domestic front remains to be seen. The next few days could prove decisive in determining whether the United States reclaims control, or slides further into chaos. The ongoing turmoil in Washington has become a defining test of President Donald Trump's leadership, a battle between his vision of strength and the realities of governance. With the government still on the verge of shutdown and the nuclear testing announcement igniting controversy worldwide, Trump now faces mounting pressure from all sides. Within his administration, officials are split between those urging restraint and those pushing for a more defiant stance against both Congress and international critics. Inside the White House, sources describe a tense atmosphere. Senior aides are reportedly divided. The national security team argues that nuclear testing would reinforce deterrence and Project American Resolve, while economic advisors warn that the shutdown and uncertainty are inflicting long-term damage on markets and public trust. The president believes that boldness wins, said one close advisor. He sees this as a moment to reassert control, both over Congress and the world. Meanwhile, the effects of the shutdown are rippling through everyday American life. In major cities such as New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, federal offices remain closed, national parks are locked, and families dependent on government assistance are struggling. Tens of thousands of federal workers have gone weeks without pay, relying on food banks and community donations to survive. The crisis is no longer a distant political issue, it's becoming a lived reality for millions. Airports across the country are reporting longer delays, as unpaid TSA officers call in sick or refuse to work under worsening conditions. Small businesses that rely on federal contracts are also bearing the brunt, with many warning they will not survive if operations don't resume soon. Economists predict that if the shutdown continues for another month, it could shave up to 0.5% off U.S. GDP, a potentially devastating blow to an already fragile economy. Trump, however, remains unapologetic. Speaking to supporters at a rally in Ohio, he declared, "We will not be weak. America will never bow down. The fake news can talk all it wants, we are restoring power to the people." The crowd cheered, but political observers noted the deep divide between Trump's base and the rest of the country. A CBS poll released this week found that while 52% of Republican voters support the president's handling of the shutdown, 68% of independents and 84% of Democrats disapprove. Media coverage of Trump's actions remains polarizing. Conservative outlets like Fox News have praised his fearless leadership, while mainstream and liberal networks, CNN, MSNBC, and The Washington Post, accuse him of using nuclear theatrics to distract from a self-inflicted political crisis. The New York Times editorial board wrote, "When a leader turns to nuclear power displays to mask domestic failure, it signals not confidence but desperation." Protests continue to grow in cities across the United States. Thousands have joined rallies demanding an end to the shutdown and a reversal of the nuclear testing plan. In Washington, D.C., demonstrators chanted, "Fund jobs, not bombs," outside the Capitol. Environmental groups have filed petitions to block any nuclear activity on U.S. soil, warning that such moves could cause irreversible harm to ecosystems and public health. Internationally, the United States finds itself increasingly isolated. European allies, while cautious not to criticize Trump directly, are expressing concern through diplomatic channels. NATO officials worry that renewed nuclear testing could fracture alliance unity and undermine years of disarmament progress. Meanwhile, rival powers like Russia and China appear to be exploiting the situation to strengthen their own geopolitical positions. Even within Trump's party, cracks are beginning to show. A handful of Republican senators have privately warned that continued defiance could lead to political disaster in upcoming elections. Senator Lisa Murkowski reportedly told colleagues, "If we can't govern, we don't deserve to lead." However, Trump's inner circle remains convinced that confrontation, not compromise, will energize his supporters and secure his political future. Political analysts believe that Trump is playing a high-risk game, betting that his image as a tough, uncompromising leader will outweigh the economic and diplomatic fallout. "He's gambling with both domestic stability and international credibility," said Dr. Robert Hale, a professor of political science at Georgetown University. "If this strategy fails, it could redefine not just his presidency, but America's global role for years to come. The next few days will be crucial. If Congress cannot reach a budget agreement, and if Trump proceeds with any form of nuclear testing, the U.S. may find itself facing one of the most volatile moments in modern history, a collision of internal paralysis and external aggression. Allies are watching, markets are trembling, and ordinary Americans are caught in the middle of a crisis they did not choose. The United States now stands at a crossroads. One path leads to reconciliation, renewed confidence, and stability through diplomacy. The other leads deeper into division, isolation, and potential global confrontation. Whether President Trump can steer the nation away from that precipice, or whether he will accelerate its approach, may soon determine the fate of both his presidency and America's standing in the world.